Hi there, Neil. Thanks very much for joining us today, just for a bit of a chat and a bit of background into the Life Changes Trust and National Lottery Community Fund, and I guess our relationship. So really appreciate you giving us a bit of time.
Thanks for having me along. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. All right, so I'll get the grilling underway. So the first question for you really is, I want to just sort of take you back in time, really, I guess, to before the trust was set up. Could you give us a bit of background into why it was Big Lottery Fund at the time, I think, why the fund was keen to set up an independent trust, and what, I suppose, what you hoped that you would achieve?
Yeah, so you have to go back to kind of 2009, 2010 to the work to set up Life Changes Trust, and there were a number of things going on at the time. I think there were kind of three very important things going on. So there was a lot of work around the life outcomes for young people leaving the care system in Scotland, and what could we do to improve that substantially, because the comparison to other countries was pretty salutary. There's emerging work around working with older people as well in areas like dementia and care of older people, and a real groundswell of work around voice and the voice of experienced people and decisions that affected them. So all of those things were kind of in the policy side. And then there's a bit of a technical grant making thing going on, which is national lottery funders are project funders, time limited funders, but now and again we try and fund into what we grandly call more strategic issues, and these felt like things that could benefit from deeper, longer term investment. And there's also a bit of a limitation to what we do as a funder around really engaging with people and developing specialist skills around seeking to directly influence policy or advocate. And also our expertise is in being a funder. It's not in interventions with specific people. We have lots of great folk at the fund who know lots about that stuff, but we want it to be able to see what could be done by a really committed organisation focused on these two issues, with a substantial, secure investment over a period of time. So that's why we set up Life Changes Trust, and the goal is what's set out in the trust deed. It was to transform the life chances and opportunities for people who had experience of the care system in Scotland, and also people affected by dementia and those who cared for those people.
And so, yeah, so once we were set up then, were there any surprises for you in terms of the direction that we took as an organisation?
I don't know, to be surprised, we'd have had to have a very firm view about what we expected to do, right? And I think for us, what was really, really interesting was some of the work around, well, how do you frame this problem? How do you deal with this problem? How do you really engage voice? And I remember early on some of the work around how you support people with dementia to be involved in things like medical conferences, or to be able to express what they wanted to do. And some of that felt really new and fresh. And then lots of the work around care experienced young people and just really supporting those strong voices. So I don't know if any of that was surprising, but it was exciting.
Yeah, so a bit of a sense of maybe journeying into unknown territory, even from the early stages. But you were kind of alluding there to maybe at the beginning of the relationship, some kind of thoughts at the fund about the pace and how that was going. Obviously, that relationship's developed over time, and it's been an important one, the relationship between the trust and the National Lottery Community Fund. How would you describe it now, do you think?
I think it feels like a pretty mature partnership. I think partnerships are like, is it the most abused word in funding? It's that, or community, right? But partnership in that very real sense, I think we've been able to be pretty supportive of each other as organisations. We haven't got upset when you've nicked loads of our staff, for example. And I think we've also learned from the trust, and I think some of the work you guys have done has influenced how we've thought about things, and that's felt really positive. So there's that relationship, and I think I was thinking about this the other day actually. At the fund, I think we have a certain pride in what you guys have achieved at Life Changes Trust, and I guess it's kind of, see, I'm getting older now, and I guess it's kind of like maybe watching your grandkids do something really good or do something really cool. So there's a bit of that as well, that kind of pride in how the trusts work.
Oh, that's a really great way of thinking about it. And yeah, I mean, I think I have apologised already, but I am sorry that we did draw in quite so many of your staff. But I think it sort of captures that element of, there has been quite a bit of cross-fertilisation, because the staff that came to the trust from NLCF, they brought, a lot of robustness and discipline around funding just at the right time for us, and they obviously brought other expertise and knowledge. So it's been, I think there's been a good sort of two-way flow between the organisations that's been pretty important to both of us in different ways. Yeah. Okay, so the topic of this webinar is obviously strategic funding. It might seem, I guess, a bit like one of these sort of jargon phrases, but what does strategic funding mean to you? What comes to mind?
I suppose that there's a couple of things that feel important around strategic funding. There's a criticism of a lot of strategy that says we make a lot of plans that we call strategies. So strategic funding should be funding that shapes the environment as much as just delivers specific outcomes, I think, and challenges some of our thinking, because it should have an impact that's wider than just its pure delivery. And so sometimes as well, that can actually be about sometimes quite short term, quite impactful funding. But I think mostly when we think of strategic funding, certainly the way we think of it, National Community Fund, we think of it as being longer term, maybe a bit more patient, maybe with a certain level of innovation, but also focused on some specific area. There's a really good book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by a guy called Richard, and early on he says a bad strategy is a strategy that requires 6 helicopters when you don't have 6 helicopters. And so strategic funding needs to be about, for us, taking a topic, an area or a theme that is of a manageable scale. So you need a certain level of focus, but you also need a certain level of scale, and you need to try and hit that area in the middle of those two things, and that can make a significant difference over time. And there's lots and lots of chat in the funding world about, how much money do you throw at something. I don't think that's what strategic funding is. It's about resources, but it's also about thinking and connections and working with the grain of what exists, but also sometimes challenging what exists.
That's really interesting. I've had a few conversations with people recently, obviously just reflecting on the experience of the trust, but also preparing to kind of hand things over, pass the baton on to people that we know want to build and grow the work that we started. Your point about sometimes doing that work strategically means challenging some of the kind of existing practices and some of the status quo, I guess, and that definitely feels recognisable. I think thinking back to the earlier days of the trust, I think some people were a bit surprised about the way that we were approaching things, and particularly our determination to connect really directly with people living with dementia, unpaid carers and young people with care experience. I think that did maybe upset some expectations, but it felt really important to us, if we were going to make a strategic difference, that we were really alongside people with lived experience, and that was a central aspect of our work. Yeah. All right, so the next question then is about flexibility. I mean, it's been really important to us as a funder to try and work flexibly with the projects that we funded and the people that we're alongside. What's your take on flexible funding? How important do you think it is?
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I think if we've learned anything over the past couple of years, it's that line about the best laid plans, isn't it? And often what you see as a funder is you see people presenting you with an application or a scenario that says, this is the situation, this is what we're going to do, this is what we think will change. And of course, you make a kind of decision at a fixed point in time to invest in something, and then stuff happens, life intervenes. you introduce people into the scenario, and actually those people have slightly different ideas and different interpretations, and so funding needs to be at least flexible enough to deal with the fact that nothing quite turns out the way you expected. So as a minimum, I think any funder that is really, really rigid about what it expects to see is going to have a difficult time, to be honest. And I think the other thing is that that we've learned in the past couple of years is the importance of allowing organisations to respond to what's important at the time on the ground. And if the world changes around about you, you better be ready to flex too, because in the end, you know, we're entrusted with public money at the National Lottery Community Fund, and our job is to make sure that money works as hard as it can and does the best it can for the communities that, frankly, it came from in the first place. And to do that, you have to be willing to work with folk and work with what need emerges. You need to be able to let folk learn and change, you know. Big private sector companies don't say, well, we started making blue jumpers and we don't care if folk want red ones. And similarly, you have to expect other organisations to be able to react like that, don't you? So flexible funding feels really important. The other thing that feels important is that funding models suit the issue or the organisation or the people you're working with.
Yeah, and as you say, the pandemic, if it's taught us anything, it's that, you know, however many plans we make and however much we think we've mapped out what lies in front of us, then sometimes events just take over.
Aye.
And I think we've seen, you know, people in the funding world doing things that they just, you know, previously would have thought would not have been possible in terms of their funding relationships and what they ask of people. And you touched on this earlier, Neil, but you know, what kind of influence do you think setting up the trust has had on NLCF? And have you seen any changes in the fund? And are there any further changes that you might like to see in the future as a result of having the trust?
I think the thing that working with the trust has probably influenced the most is our thinking around how you engage people with expertise that they've gained through their own experience in issues that affect them. And some of that's about technique and about thinking really hard about what you can do and what it takes to do some of that stuff well. And sometimes that affects decisions not to push into that territory where you maybe don't feel like you have the right resource or the right capacity to do that well. And other times I think it has a more pervasive impact on our work, and we seek to do that more. So we are constantly seeking to get closer to the communities we serve. We serve a very broad range of people across Scotland. So the way we've done that is particularly through place-based work, and you can see some parallels with like the regional events that you guys have been running with the dementia programme, or engaging with other bodies. So in that sense, I think we're in a space where we're trying to be an organisation that is more connected to a set of voices who are in the communities we serve. I think that's a long-term project. You're never done, I think, in that work. But I think there's kind of a sense of what it takes to do that well that we've probably picked up from the trust.
That's great to hear, and I think it kind of captures that idea maybe of ripple effects, which is something that we've been talking about quite a lot in relation to the impact of the trust more generally, and that it's sometimes multiple different waves, as you put it kind of earlier on. Okay, thanks so much, Neil, for sharing a bit of time with us and giving us your thoughts today. That's been really great. Yeah, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much.